Welcome everyone to the Brooklyn Book Festival. I'm Sarah MacLean and you are here for Love and Romance. We are so excited to be the only panel about romance novels this weekend at the Brooklyn Book Festival, which is happening both live and virtually. So thank you all for joining us virtually. I'm so excited to be here with Vanessa Riley and Piper Huguley and Marcella Bell. And I'm gonna kick it, because we don't have very much time, I'm gonna kick it off to these amazing writers to introduce themselves and introduce their work and talk to you a little bit about them. So Marcella, why don't you start for us?
Okay, great. My name is Marcella Bell and I write romance. I write for Harlequin and HQN, and I write for the Harlequin Presents line, as well as for HQN and their kind of full-length romances. My recent out now is The Wildest Ride, and coming out in next week is Pregnant After One Forbidden Night, my latest in the Harlequin Presents line.
My favorite. One night stand, secret babies. I'm sure.
All of it.
Piper, tell us about your books.
I'm Piper Huguley, and I've written historical romance. I have two series, one called Migrations of the Heart, which is about a family who traveled from the south of the United States to the north looking for love, and Home to Milford College series, which is another historical series about the founding of a historically Black college and university in Georgia. And I, in July, published my my first contemporary romance called Sweet Tea by Hallmark Publishing, and it actually is a modern day Home to Milford College book. So the hero and heroine of the Home to Milford College books are the 3 times great grandparents of the heroine.
I love that. One of my favorite things about romance is how writers just stay in the same world the whole time, and so readers can just constantly follow. So that's such a cool fact. Vanessa, tell us about your books.
Okay, well, I'm Vanessa Riley, and speaking of staying in the same world, I stay primarily between 1750 and 1830s, which people know as the Georgian, Regency, slightly Victorian eras. And I write historical fiction, historical romance, and historical mystery. So The Brides of London, I'm very big into strong found families and sisterhoods. And this is a novel or series of novels where women decide they're going to take the power to their own, put ads in the newspaper, and hopefully find a man that'll work. Maybe not. A Duke, the Lady and the Baby, and Earl, the Girl and a Toddler. Earl, the Girl and a Toddler came out this year. We are looking at Regency a little differently. We have widows who have come together in a secret organization to take back the power. And we start with a Duke, the Lady and the Baby, a woman who's infant. He controls the destiny of everyone. He's got the money. Who controls the baby? Controls everything. And so Patience Jordan, who is from Demerara, wants to get her son back, but she's got to defeat evil forces and that darn handsome Duke, because there's always a darn handsome Duke. And lastly, my first historical fiction came out this year, Island Queen. It is about a woman who was formerly enslaved, raises her own money to buy her freedom and the freedom of her family, and then she goes on to build businesses across the West Indies. A number of romances or love affairs are in this book, as she deals with men and colonialism and just trying to find her way in the world.
Thank you. So one of the things that I think is most interesting about writing in general, but particularly romance, is this sense of all of us having a real origin story with the genre. Many romance writers come to the genre as readers first. So I wonder if you could all talk a little bit about your romance origin story, either how you came to it through reading or just how you decided to write it. Piper, would you start?
My mother was not a romance reader, so I couldn't snatch hers from her bookshelf. She read other stuff. But I did, when I was a teenager, read all of the young adult stuff that happened to be out that particular time. And I had a particular fondness for Sunfire. If there were any old heads out there that remember the old Sunfire series, where it was a series of historical young historical romances where the girl would always have to choose between one obviously good dude and one obviously bad dude. That really nurtured my sense of historical romance. But once I got to college, I then graduated to Laverne Spencer, and she really opened the door for me to more historical romance.
And then what about writing? How did you come to start writing?
Well,
Piper?
She inspired me, I think, too. It's like I might be able to write something. Even though when I was 12, I did pen my first romance, which was a contemporary at that time. It was called The President's Daughter and the King's Wife. And it was about, I'm giving my age away. This is preach before Charles and Diana. But the daughter of the president, whose name was Fauna Sheila Fields, and King Bruce of England, that had fallen in love. So I didn't even know I was into like the royalty romance at that point as a trope. But I do remember that being my first title. And I ran up my parents' phone bill researching their royal wedding. So, but I didn't get into trouble because my mother felt that I had a writing spirit that she wanted to nurture rather than smack out of me.
I love it. Marcella, what about you? What's your origin story?
So I did have a mom who liked to read romance. So I do have that very classic. Around 12, I kind of discovered my mom's romances. And so I really got hooked around that age. And so I was a pretty voracious reader in high school, and of kind of cross genre, but my tops would probably be YA, romance, and fantasy. And so that's kind of, I just read a lot of that. And then I also kind of, so like that, it was just pretty easy stumbling into. I think I actually was like a take your daughter to work day, and my mom had her book in her purse, and I just was like, I guess I'll do this because I'm bored at the car dealership. And I read it, and then that was getting in. And then writing was interesting because even as a really young girl, another kind of classic similar, I love writing, I love telling stories. I have stories I wrote when I was really young, but I also really early decided that I really didn't want to be poor. Like I really did not want to be poor. I didn't want to be poor. And so I was like, well, you can't be a writer. Clearly you can't be a writer. And so I had a very kind of hero's journey rejection of writing multiple times throughout my life until finally a kind of a combination of meeting the right partner. And so he kind of found out that I'd had this lifelong dream I'd been repressing. He's like, you can't repress your dreams. You have to go for it if you have it. And it was really encouraging. And so then I was like, okay, well, if I'm going to try, what am I going to start with? And then I started with fantasy and did NaNoWriMo. I was like, oh, bit off way more than I could chew there. and I right away was like, oh, I couldn't do romance though. I don't think I could do romance. I love it too much. I'm too close to it. And I had that strong feel like I couldn't write it myself. And then so I tried middle grade, and I was doing that and really enjoying that, and kind of middle grade and YA audiences I have a very big soft spot for. And finally, I'm also on my another hat I wear is I'm a bookseller. And so I still buy books with the bookstore I used to work at. And I worked at Barnes & Noble for many years. And so like this book selling part of myself has always thrived kind of alongside the writing side. And so I was with the bookstore. We ended up starting a romance book club in Jacksonville, Oregon. And interestingly, both Macy Yates and Megan Crane / Caitlin Cruz live in Jacksonville, Oregon. And we with them started this book club. And through the book club, it turned into this seminar on romance. Honestly, we're reading a new book, we're discussing it, we're talking about the what goes on behind the scenes as well as what gets onto the page. And they were like, I think you should really try. And so they encouraged me to try writing it. And I was like, okay, well, if I'm going to start, where should I start? And Macy is really, really known for her cowboys. And she's like, I think you should start with cowboys. And so I sat down and I started writing what became the Wildest Ride. And then that's my first attempt at it. And so I fell in love right away.
What about you, Vanessa? You've been all over.
And funny because I'm in between both Marcella and Piper's stories. So I grew up in a very religious household. So certain books were not supposed to be in the household. So I had no grandma's bags or anything unless you count hymnals as what we could read. But when I got to college, but I was good at writing. I was very good at writing, but I was also very good at math. And my mama said I should always pay my bills. So I went with engineering because, she's right, math pays the bills and all these sorts of things. What she didn't tell you was you have to get through college. And there's a lot of mathematics in those engineering realms and your brain would be scattered. And you had to do something else. And so I wandered into the bookstore and I literally found the Signet romances. And I was hooked on Signet romances. And my ultimate favorite, I just got back, The Undaunted Bride by Miranda Cameron. Total bananas, the hero, wounded scar, crazy cousin. It's just every banana twisty plot that you could throw into this book. Miranda must have just been sitting around smoking. But I've been hooked ever since. And literally, when I had difficult pregnancies, so I had to sit my behind down, and for me, that was torture. My husband pulled out a book. So one of the things I used to do, since we couldn't get all these romance books, I would write my own episodes of television shows. So I would have the version of Dallas where JR became nice and went back to Sue Ellen and all these different things.
Singing my song.
I know. He said, forgive me. And also, but so I found one of the stories and started writing it, and the rest is history. That became my very first book, Madeline's Protector.
Yeah. Well, so this is great. And what you've done, I think, Vanessa, and I'm going to have you kind of pick up the next question, because I'm really interested in one of the things that people don't really understand about romance is that we actually have a pretty bedrock rule, which is that every book has to end with a happily ever after. And there are a lot of ways that the world tries to think about romance, both inside the romance world and outside the romance world, about that rule. But you're doing a really interesting thing, because you have written a piece of historical fiction. And I wonder if you could talk a little bit about the HEA, as we call it, and its importance, but also how you're straddling this line.
Yeah. So as Sarah's saying, in romance, that's the only book with a guaranteed promise that you're going to get a happy ever after. Now, some of the nouveau convention is happy for now. I would like to think it's happy forever, but you have to nail that. You can screw around with a whole bunch of other components in the book, but in a romance, you have to have the happy ever after. Well, when you're doing historical fiction, particularly on a live, real person, well, life is messy. You don't always get a happy ever after. Sometimes somebody dies or they have to go through several love affairs before they find that, settle in that last, that person who is the happy forever. Or once again, because it's real life, you get none of that. You just have tragic endings. And you have to reconcile that. But in those moments where it can be romantic, I want the woman to be treasured. For Dorothy Kerwin Thomas in Island Queen, she was this remarkable woman. And I don't think she would settle for just an average person just coming up to holler. I saw they had to pursue her. I saw that she was just that special woman. So I brought that in each of her significant love affairs. She has an affair with a wealthy man who I think she learns the polish, the sophistication that someone who was formerly enslaved has. If she's going to try and transition and get into these other worlds, she needs somehow to get this higher level of finish and polish and the mannerisms and the dance. So she gets that from this wealthy man. And then there's that the good old soul, where I think Adjoa Endo was like, she could take Thomas or leave Thomas. She's at that point where, you know, like, I'm doing my thing and yeah, I want a little something, but you can go or come. It's up to you. She's at that point, right? And then you get the prince, Prince William, for the new king, our future King William IV. Yes, Meghan is not the first one. And that really makes us think about Queen Charlotte's heredity, because he was into chocolate real soon. I'm just saying. And so these love affairs, which were lasting because the relationships go beyond the moment that they're having these affairs. Mm-hmm. So, you know, it was more than just a hookup or just a moment in time. And so I wanted to convey that. And so you use these skills where the playground kind of things that you put in your romances to show the deepening of the relationship. I use those tools. But once again, it's a love story. So they don't necessarily end with the two people going off and being happy forever. And so that is the defining line.
Right. What about the happily ever after? Why is it so important to romance? I'm going to let Piper or Marcella answer. Marcella, you look like you have an answer.
So it's kind of, so when I think about it, it reminds me of like a sonnet. So you don't get, like, you go to a sonnet because of the specific form you're looking for, and you don't get frustrated with the sonnet for following its form. And so at a certain point, it is the form, and like that is the form that the audience comes for. To me, I think there's I think romance is a very, very, very subjective genre. And so, I mean, and like a lot of genres really are, but romance in particular, because it's all about what makes your heart kind of beat faster and what makes your heart like skip a beat, pitter patter, all of the things, and makes you excited. And so in that, you do know that like the thing that you're going to get is this promise that they are going to end up together. And to me, I come to that because we live in, like Vanessa mentioned, we live in a real world where the best thing doesn't always happen. And for some people, the best thing doesn't happen very often at all. And so when I'm an escapist reader, and I read about things going better than they often do in real life. And I want to read about people overcoming their struggles, because it's both an example and kind of a model, a inspiration to do the same on our own, and also this like reassurance that it is possible. So when you are in that real life love story where the person you're with actually can't get over their inner trauma and they can't do their work, and you want to know that maybe that in the future they can, and maybe in the future you can find somebody who can do it too, or you want to know maybe that you can do it if you're bringing a lot to the table and you're bringing a lot of wounds. So I think that what the HEA does is it gives you this kind of promise and hope that it can happen for somebody. And if it can happen for somebody, it can happen for you. Like good things can happen.
What do you think, Piper?
Well, I know, at least for me in my books, one of the things that I've had to deal with is that the HEA can look different in different communities. And I noticed that for a lot of romance, depending upon the subgenre, part of the HEA has to do with ensuring that the protagonists have a certain amount of wealth or money. And for my characters who come from the South in either Reconstruction in the United States or in the Great Migration, I was attempting to, with those two series, to draw upon some other aspects in terms of thinking about their HEA that meant a brighter day, brighter coming day, as Frances Ellen Watkins Harper called it, or a better future for them that meant that they would be able to have a certain amount of comfort and be engaged in purposeful enterprises, like with the Home to Milford College series, where that couple is engaged with building a college that meant that the Black race could then be uplifted in a way and to be able to have opportunity. So that the HEA for Virgil and Amanda doesn't necessarily mean wealth and whatnot. It means that together they are engaged upon a life's work that's going to be meaningful and will last for a long time. So that's how I think about it.
And I think what's so interesting about that, as you talk about it, is you've also you've embedded the HEA in both ways in your books, right? You've given the Home from Milford College series an HEA individually, and now you've given them the kind of legacy HEA, which is a huge piece of romance, and not every book ends with babies, not every love story ends with babies or romance ends with babies, but in your case, you've really given this like long look at what happily ever after can look like. So to that end, I wonder if we could talk a little bit. I see people are asking in the chat about research. So let's talk a little about research, because obviously I write historicals. Two of you write mainly historicals, but Marcella's written this lush book about a rodeo and the rodeo circuit. And I think one of the misconceptions about romance that we often battle is, oh, they're just, kissing books. They don't have any of the meaningful stuff, research. It's not real research. So could we talk a little about research and how that goes? Maybe you could start, Vanessa.
Yeah. Oh, one of the things that I want people to really just destroy from their brains, put it on fire, throw it in a toilet, whatever you need to do. Writing romance is difficult. It is not an easy genre. Because of that promise that we were just talking about, it is actually difficult because you've got to find a way to make every moment new and different. Because if it was truly formulaic, it's the same story. And it's not the same story. Every author approaches it differently. Every author gives you these dynamic twists and turns. So it's always different, always fun. And it takes, I think, a greater effort to make sure that you sew up all the little loose ends and make a plausible a plausible happy ever after. So it's more difficult than people give it credit for. And for me, I want to take you there. Now, what does that mean? That means I'm going to do everything in my power to research every aspect of my time period from 1750 to 1830s to let you physically be transported in my words. So I'm going to let you know about the dresses and the fabrics and the dances and the music and the politics. That's what's going on. Because this is an extremely dynamic time frame. Everybody wants freedom in their own ways, even, from religious freedom, from the Catholics to the Protestants to America. Those rascals want freedom from the king. France wants freedom. Haiti wants freedom from everybody because everybody's got their hands out. You've got this dynamic world that's going on, and it needs to be reflected because people still found ways to love and survive during these moments. And I want to bring that to you in my work. So I do a lot of research.
Yeah, to bring
a lot
that
of research.
Yeah.
I go to archives. I have books all over the place. I even go down to street maps. So I go down to street map level in my books. If I call out a street, it's a real street.
Marcella, what about you? Can you tell us about how you do this kind of research in current day?
So it's kind of funny and interesting. So I grew up, I was born and raised in Oregon, and have like done some time in Washington as well. And just so in this kind of Western setting, I am from the West. And even though it's very interesting, because as a young woman, I was determined to be a city girl. I know I'm going to live in the big city. I would joke and tell my mom, I'm going to be a sailor with a lover in every port. I'm a wild, unfettered woman kind of thing. I just wanted this very like cosmopolitan self. But I think in part that was a reaction in kind of pushing against my mom, because my mom is a horsewoman and she was always dragging me to the country, dragging me out to here, trying to instill this love, which she did instill. She did a great job, even as resistant as I was. But because of that, a lot of what's in the book is actually informed from the experiences I had. We lived on a stables for a while, and then she's lived in different places, kind of on the edges of the suburbs, on the edges where you can push out, where things are cheaper and you can still kind of be out there. And so a lot of the book is informed by just kind of growing up and being exposed to those settings and lifestyles. So there's an element of like the hard work and the kind of like dealing with sheeps and goats and just like that basic kind of stuff. But then as much of a horsewoman as my mom is, she forbade me from going to the rodeo or even being interested in rodeo. So rodeo became it's my forbidden fruit. It's this exotic, like, and so I did have to do a lot of research, and that involved like really diving deep as if I was going to start myself, like as if I was interested in kind of doing this thing myself. Like, so it came to kind of really learning the rules. It came to watching documentaries. It came to reading as much as I could about it. Just really getting a sense of like what I could find that made sense and linked to what I already knew of the Western experience, because I felt like if I was going from there, I could have the most like authentic and just really like rooted kind of world and growth. But it really did take a lot of research, a lot of kind of a lot of talking to people. That's another part. I mean, just kind of you can talk, you can learn a lot about people who are fans of things too. So rodeo fans, from being in Southern Oregon while I was writing it, there are rodeos in Southern Oregon. And so those kind of coming through town, and Pendleton, the Pendleton Roundup is a really famous West Coast rodeo, and that happens in Oregon too. So you really get to learn a lot by just kind of tuning into your community in the West, tuning into just research sources that you can find, reading random things. Sometimes it's not what you expect. Sometimes it's the really key fact is in something offhand about something. So,
well, one of the things I was really fascinated by in your book was, so your book is a rivals to lovers story, which, you know, enemies to lovers is one of romance's favorite tropes, and rivals to lovers, just a little twist on it. And so you've got two, you've got a rodeo legend who's sort of getting old, and a young, or not a young, but a woman who, you know, feels like she can really win this rodeo, and they're competing for a lot of money. And I don't think I realized like how, so that was so fascinating to me, how you built this whole world with these two people who were spending and it was just a year on the circuit. Like it's not even a full year. Not even a year, a short time. Yeah. So I didn't know that that rodeos were so kind of built that way, and that people could just enter.
Well, and so that's like kind of, you know, the unique thing, like that was the creative license, is most of the time people can't just enter. Most of the time you actually can't, and that's part of the heroine's journey, is that she's got this passion for rodeo, but she wants to ride rough stock, which is bulls and broncs, and that's not something women are really given access to. And she feels like she's actually missed her time because she wasn't able to do it to build up the points, which you usually need to build up points and build up kind of almost like a profile if you're an artist. But you have to be able to show the event organizers that you're not going to be a waste of everybody's time. And so what I did to actually like allow that to happen is this was a very unique thing, because it was also a reality TV show. So it was the first time they were doing rodeo as reality TV. And so they had this like American Idol style open, anyone who wants to try can try. And that's where she really gets to say, like, I've always known how to do this. But it was, even in structuring that, I had to do a lot of research, because you can't just go up to a rodeo in most cases and try.
Right. But I do think this is so interesting because both Vanessa and Marcella, you're both talking about, women setting heroines down on the page, doing remarkable things. And Piper, I wonder if you could talk about that too, because it feels like remarkable in a romance novel for a heroine there are so many ways to write that script. So could you talk a little about your own research and particularly around your amazing heroines who I love so much?
Well, I cheat a little bit because my area that I stay firmly in is the 19th and 20th centuries, which is my area of expertise for my day job as a professor. So there's a certain amount of that world that I know and I'm expected to know already for what it is that I do. And usually when I think of something I want to write about, I tend to narrow in on an event during which I would wonder how would a woman play out in this particular situation. And for like the Home to Milford College series, Amanda, as a relatively rare thing, a Black college graduate prior or at the end of the Civil War, how would it be if she were to travel and go teach in the South unchaperoned? Kind of situation. So that's how that particular idea came about. The Migrations of the Heart series came about or based on my grandmother and her sisters who made the trip from the South to the North during what they call the second wave of the Great Migration, which is the greatest internal migration of Black people from the South to the North. So they came later around, World War II-ish, around that particular time period in terms of it. But the Migrations of the Heart series is set at the very beginning of it in 1915 in terms of, so yeah, my grandmother and her sisters were great women and yeah, proud to have come from them.
That's fascinating. Just to everybody watching, you should be able to put questions in the Q&A box on Crowdcast, and I am doing my best to keep them. But I want to talk with everyone here about writing romance, and particularly because when we talk about romance as romance writers, as romance readers, we talk so much of it as so much about it as a genre of hope and joy. And I wonder if you could talk a little bit over the last year or longer, almost 2 years now. It's been a rough time for all of us, right? We're all living through a real national trauma. And you've all written books during this time. So I wonder if you could talk a little about the balance maybe it's not a balance, maybe it's a joy to be writing romance during this time, but romance as a genre of emotion and how it's felt this for these last few months and the work of it. I'm going to let whoever feels like they want to start.
Well, sort of finish off in terms of my Sweet Tea book, which is the contemporary. That is the other trope of it is that it's a food novel, and so it was already baked in because during the pandemic, everyone was at home and eating stuff. So that was already part of the research part that I got to do. So I found a lot of joy in that. So.
Yeah, for me, I wrote like 3 books during the time frame of the pandemic, and one book I got revisions, and in the middle of this, and so for me, my car hadn't been moved in I filled up like 4 times last year. Okay, yeah. Normally I'm on the road, I'm going places 4 times. It was hard to believe. But in the middle of the pandemic, we also had the George Floyd period. And I got my revisions to An Earl and a Girl. And it made me add more to this book. So my books are already long. I apologize already in advance, folks. But the Earl is a Blackamoor man. And I wanted to make sure I spent more time in his environment, in his world. And you got to see more exceptional Black men, actual real people of the time frame. Some of them are buddies with the Prince Regent and whatnot, and just really spent time honoring them as my way of response. So we are very affected as romance writers. You know, we are emotional. We have jobs to do. Writing is a job. It's a pleasure. And we are not unaffected. And for me, that was, you know, because normally, okay, nobody's going outside. I got Instacart. I mean, this is kind of a normal life, Instacart, Uber Eats, etc. But for me, the George Floyd, I wanted to make sure that they were honored in that way. And it was kind of my response to do that. So that's how my pandemic moment affected my writing.
I think that's so important because, especially because you write historicals, and one of the things that people often think about historical romance is that it's set apart in many ways from modern sensibilities. So that's so important that you said that. Thanks, Vanessa. Marcella, what about you? How is writing romance?
It was, I mean, I actually think similar to Vanessa that, so because you're on the romance timeline, you're writing way ahead of your book coming out. And so the book that I have been mostly so I've been working on the sequel to The Wildest Ride a lot. And the sequel features the hero of this book's best friend, and he is a Black man, and he's one of the driving, like, his story really takes center stage in this book. And his story was already kind of, like Vanessa said, kind of wanting to put on the page this experience of a Black man. And I just found that I had a lot more to say because of what was going on. And I had a lot more power, not power necessarily like I expect to be moved, but power in like feeling, my own feeling. And so there's a lot more of that got so into that book. And it affected the revisions a lot. And really a lot of the things that I felt like I wanted to say, I think, were really impacted by what was going on in the world, specifically racially in the US. And then on the other hand, I was also writing presents, which is like almost, so the presents writing in a certain way got a little bit harder because presents, my cowboys said really real world, like this is it, but presents is like billionaires and exotic locations, and so there's a certain amount of freedom and fun that I often give myself, but it was sometimes hard to get into that space at times. And I have young children too, so we were homeschooling and we were doing all these different things, and that affected my writing schedule and the amount of time that I could write. And so this layer of like franticness and edge that I would have to kind of like break through in order to kind of make good progress. I could make bad progress without breaking through it, but then you just have to edit that out anyway. So, but it was a big effect, but in some ways it made me like much stronger about what I wanted to say. And in some ways it made the job a lot harder to access that free funness and that lightness.
I think this is a good place to ask one of the questions that the audience has posed, which is when you are writing and when you are writing, you know, worlds like the ones that you're writing, how do you refill the well? Where do you find the spark of creativity? Is there a ritual or a place
reading other books?
Well, recommend some books. You're around a lot of
Oh goodness.
Yeah. So,
recommending books is hard. It's like, well, where do we go for?
Here we go. So for me, I always do the reward system. So when I finish writing or significant chapters, I get a piece of Godiva chocolate. That refills my soul. And then when I'm done, I get to binge read. So currently I'm binge reading Nora Bell's The Devil's Own Duke. I'm reading Donna Hill's Confessions in B Flat. I'm reading Seven Husbands of Elegant Hugo. And I'm also reading Inheritance by Zoraida.
Nice.
So once again, binge, and these are all phenomenal people.
Yes. so our books just arrived. So we for a while we were just bookless, just no books. It was very, very unsettling. I was like,
traumatic
sacrifice for the food. It was too much. But I did get to read some Kerrigan Byrne recently. I love Kerrigan. She, you talk about, you're like, she's sitting there. I don't know that she smokes. I don't get the impression she does, but you know that she's back there like, we're gonna go for it. Let's do it.
Put it all in.
Put it in. Get it in here. And so I definitely love her. I am a huge Joanna Lindsay fan, like to the max. She is like probably the second romance author I read ever, and I just love her stuff. So I like, sometimes you just go back to that one you love. So I'll read Once a Princess again, or All I Need Is You again, just like all of those. And then just really more recently, just getting to get to know a lot of the work of more of my contemporary authors, because I started reading romance, fantasy, all these at the library. So you kind of are subject to what the library has. You don't get to like pick and choose your author base. And so now I've just been really like getting to know my peers and checking their work out.
Yeah, in terms of romance, of course, if I'm reading historical romance, of course, I read The Great Beverly Jenkins. And for contemporary, my friend Sharon Cooper, who writes contemporary and romantic suspense, which I like a lot of what Sharon does, particularly the Jenkins and Son series, because she used to work construction, so she puts in nice details that way in that particular series. But I also read a lot of historical fiction, most pointedly biographical historical fiction. So Sisters in Arms and some advanced arcs of Carolina Built by Kiana Alexander, Sisters in Arms by Kaya Alderson, are some of the other kind of historical stuff that I read. Because now I guess people kind of seem to know who I am, so they want me to read their books in advance. So there's some of that that's going on in terms of what's going on with
that's the best perk.
With the reading list. So
I have to shout out Tracy Losey. She is the best. I love her book so much. So much. And
her new cover, the new cover.
I know, it's so pretty. I can't wait for it.
I don't want to brag, but I've read that book. It's called American Royalty. And it's about an American rapper who goes to London and falls in love with a royal prince. And it is magnificent. So you can pre-order that now. It's called American Royalty. There are a couple of more little questions. So this one is a little rapid fire because we're running out of time, but what is your favorite trope? Let's say to read and to write, or so you're allowed two answers.
Enemies to Lovers is my favorite to read, and Secret Baby, I like to read that too. But enemies to lovers to write.
I think probably I love Enemies to Lovers. It's just so good. But I also really like, I don't know how to say this, like woman who writes like a man. That's a Tamora Pierce novel. But that idea of a woman in a man's position, a woman who maybe gets mistaken as a man. And that's, I love that. I can't get enough of that.
Marriage of Convenience. Marriage of Convenience.
I'm so surprised, Vanessa. I'm so surprised. So tell us what's next. So we've talked about the 3 books that you all have as recently out recently, and these are all books that you can get right now. Island Queen by Vanessa, Sweet Tea by Piper, and The Wildest Ride by Marcella. And so tell us what to expect. Vanessa, why don't you go first?
Okay, so in April, you're going to get the 3rd and last book of the Rogues and Remarkable Women called, we had a name change, A Duke, the Spy, an Artist, and a Lie.
Ooh,
Yes.
nice.
Can I hear a threesome? Anyway. We get Sister Mother Warrior, which is my next historical fiction, comes out in July. That is the two women who shaped the Haitian Revolution. And then in August or the fall, we get Murder in Westminster. You're going to meet Lady Worthing Mysteries. So that's it.
Nice. You've been very busy.
Mm-hmm.
Piper?
In
Sorry.
June,
Oh, no, you're fine. You're good.
in June, my first historical fiction book about Anne Lowe, the Black wedding dress designer of Jackie Kennedy's wedding dress, which is known as the most photographed wedding dress in history, will come out. And I've been working on my next historical fiction project and the next book in this contemporary Milford series that will be a Christmas book, since Hallmark would want the Christmas book now, which is called At the Christmas Party Hop. So.
That's so great.
I love that title too.
I didn't know that about Jackie Kennedy's wedding dress either. That's fantastic.
June 7th, yes, that's when.
That's great. I mentioned it earlier. I have this one coming out this month. So Pregnant After One Forbidden Night. So I have a couple presents, but I'm also working on the revisions of the sequel to The Wildest Ride, which is called The Rodeo Queen. And it's almost done, and that will come out next summer.
Excellent. And now, just in the last minute that we have, can you tell everyone where they can find you? Marcella, why don't you go first?
I am on Instagram. That's about all I am right now. And I haven't been very active, but that is where you can find me. And it is me.
Piper?
I'm on Instagram, but very unwillingly at Piper_Huguley, but much more often at Twitter at Piper Huguley and Facebook, Piper G. Huguley.
Go to VanessaRiley.com, and that has all my social media. Join my newsletter, and I'm very active on Instagram, sort of active on Twitter, and yeah, I'm there on Facebook.
That's how I feel about Facebook too.
But you'll get more secrets on Instagram. So follow me on Instagram.
I don't understand it.
And you can find all of these magnificent women's magnificent books wherever books are sold, including the independent booksellers that are working with Brooklyn Book Festival right now. But find them at your local indie. Support local independent bookstores. There's a supply chain issue coming through the end of the year. Make sure you order your books for the holidays now and support local indies. I'm Sarah MacLean. I write historical romances. You can find my most recent book, Bombshell, also alongside all these other magnificent books. You can find me at sarahmaclean.net. And thank you to the Brooklyn Book Festival for hosting this panel, for supporting romance, and for supporting all of these magnificent authors. Yeah. Thank you all for joining us.
Thank you.
Thank you
for having us.